Hello, friends. We are live again. Last week this week was built. Hopefully, you did not watch us on Tuesday. If you did, I'm sorry for you. But there is fortunately everything from build is available. If you go to channel 9, you can watch all the sessions, which you definitely should. And so meanwhile, we'll continue our discussion on the connection abstractions that we talked, I think, last Thursday. And
Yep.
with lots of notes. Let me just scroll down to the notes, which I think is probably faster. Name is here we go.
All right, so just take it from the top, I guess. Should these be interfaces or classes? I think that with the advent of DIMs, interfaces aren't too bad here. I'm not sure what abstract-based classes will get us there, but I'm not opposed to, I guess, prototyping something and seeing how it looks with base classes.
So one word on DIMs. So keep in mind that when you rely on DIMs, you may cut off languages that don't support them. And then secondly, there's this larger work item that we still haven't really tackled because nobody has, I guess, has sit down yet. But like, there still is this concern that we don't quite know enough about DIMs to really understand what the servicing constraints are. So there's still the fear, because we found out in some cases that adding DIMs will break stuff, right? Which is the question of like where you put the default method in an interface hierarchy. So there's still this concern that because it's new, you might not think you get the benefits you're actually getting out of it. So in
What's
general,
going? Sorry, I'm
sorry,
just going to email you in general. Like, what's going to cause us to learn what those downsides are?
I think part of it is just we have to prototype it and actually see what actually falls off, because I mean, learning by shipping is not great for customers if this is a highly used abstraction, because then we corner ourselves, right? I
I got
think.
one for you. So ASP.NET Core is shipping two things that use DIM. So we'll tell you in a few years.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like ideally, we would prototype something earlier and then just basically simulate what typical versioning looks like and see whenever anything breaks. Like I think like actually shipping is not great because first of all it takes a long time, and then secondly when we actually break people, well at that point you're kind of screwed because you
But
can't go back in
the,
time.
the problem is though we ship the feature, so it's like telling customers don't use it until we finish the feature, which isn't done yet, but we shipped it.
No,
Isn't the same thing?
that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying so we know what the feature does, right? We know how the feature
Yeah,
works, right? What I'm saying is that using it as a way to after the fact change the interface is very different from just adding them, right? Because part of the reason why we added them was Java interop, which has DIMs, right?
sure.
I think the question is just similar to anything that we do in API design. Is like, what is like, how do we version this over time, right? And I mean, yeah, we shipped default properties, sorry, not default properties, default parameters a while ago, and it took
Yeah,
us some time to figure out how we can actually use them safely, so that we can actually version our APIs after we edit them, right? So that's kind of an orthogonal item to how the feature works. I mean, it's not entirely orthogonal for us, but
color me skeptical. It's fine. I mean, I don't have a huge pushback. I would say like if we can make the base class work in Castro, that seems okay.
so one thing I'm still not clear on is like, can we, like, if you have an interface, right? Say in V1 you don't have you don't extend any interface. Then in V2 you want to extend another interface. With DIMs, can you safely do that? And I'm not sure the answer is yes to that. Versus if you have an abstract base type, of course you can add another interface to it, right? Like, so there's a few things where it's not clear to me that you get all the benefits that an abstract base type would give you.
Sure.
David, I'm just curious. The two examples you cited, are you shipping new interfaces with DIMs, or are you adding DIMs to existing interfaces?
I believe the first one we added to a existing interface, and the second one is a brand new interface.
Yeah, that one I have almost no concerns about.
So yeah, so one was an authentication feature in ASP.NET Core that we added a method to. I'll try to find it.
I mean,
Yeah.
like, I'm not saying we should never evolve our positions from our guidelines, but I think that we need to have a strong reason to evolve our positions from the guidelines, and it says essentially if a base class works, use a base class, and use an interface if it ends in able or otherwise describes partial functionality instead of core functionality.
Yeah, I mean, I will say though, like even if dims would work just fine, an abstract base type will always give you more control, right? Because you can add new methods that are non-virtual, which you can't really do with an interface. Everything is always virtual, right? So there's a certainly some loss in fidelity if you go down that path. I mean, to me, it's kind of like if there's a, I mean, to me, the way I see interfaces is that seems to be an aesthetic argument in favor of them. And I think on the design guidelines, we generally try to avoid aesthetic arguments. It's more like what features do you need, and would an abstract base type work for you?
So, for example, the property bag, the interface. If you told me that was going to be a base class, I would say no, because we actually want to implement that thing on the types that we currently have already without having another allocation, right?
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
As for the listeners, like those, we do have classes today in Capture that I'm hoping we could actually implement this interface or derive this base class from. I'm hoping that that works. We don't have to break consumers in 5.0.
Right.
So I'm fine having the base class as being the plan of record for the listener and the connection, factory, and then seeing if that works. If not, then we can discuss like the fact that we will have to make a breaking change in ASP.NET.
Okay. Why don't we tentatively agree to use base classes? I will kind of prototype that a little bit and make sure it still works.
And specifically, like, not for everything. I think for connection, it makes sense. Connection and the listener and the factory, not for the property bag.
Yep.
It's also worth noting that for dims, you don't have to make the methods virtual. You can put the sealed keyword on them and it prevents them from being virtual.
Awesome.
Oh,
they fixed.
Okay.
And what about Ema's other question? I think you were saying, like, could you implement other interfaces with dims? Was the question? So
just say yes, and then it all goes away.
So could I have like a dispose default interface method that implements iDisposable? Is that the question?
The concern there is, I mean, we tried this with the read-only collections, right? Where the idea was that we would make the existing interfaces, like let's say iCollection, derive from iRead-only collection, and effectively implement the iRead-only collection APIs, so that it doesn't break explicit interface implementations. But that causes problems because now you're implementing a base interface method on a more derived one, which means if you have a shared diamond, you no longer have a best default implementation in the runtime with one exception. That's kind of the problem that we had. And so that's kind of the concern that we have, that, you know, you might end up in a world where at runtime it's ambiguous which one to call.
Isn't that only the case for existing code and that's not been recompiled, and only if both are implicitly implemented? If one's implicit and one's explicit, then it will never conflict.
Right, but like that's generally speaking not something you can rely on, right? So the problem.
Well, if we make it explicit, then we can rely on it, because then both will never be implicit.
I'm not sure I follow. So if you have an interface, right, and then you add another interface to it, in order to add another interface to it, you have to implement all methods from the base.
Right, and if you implement them explicitly on the interface, make them explicit implementations, then they'll exist, and they will never conflict with anything that the user's already defined.
It's not about what the user defines. It's when you have a shared diamond, the runtime has to define which dim to call.
Right, which isn't a problem if you've got one that's explicit and one that's implicit. I'm pretty sure the runtime handles that, but
I think that's still the same problem, because I mean, basically, like, so you have a base, then you have two interfaces that are both derived from the base. Both want to add this interface to it, so both have an implementation for that interface. And now you have another type implementing both interfaces. Now you have two dims, both are explicit. Which one would the runtime call?
Okay, yeah. In that case, if the user didn't also define one, then it would conflict.
Right, and that's kind of the thing with the read-only interfaces. That might not. That's kind of where we are, right? That it's possible that it's not a general problem, right? Because it's like it depends on various things. It was just an example where it kind of freaks me out a bit that you have these what sounds like simple rules, but when you actually compose larger systems with them, you can end up in a world where stuff doesn't fly, right? And so the question is, can we get more crisp around what these rules are, and can we basically distill them down to local rules so we can reason about our versioning bubbles? Because if you tell me nobody can have a shared diamond, it's like, well, how do I reason about this when I look just at one interface, right? That's the problem. With classes, you don't have that problem because, well, you can't have multiple inheritance, so it's kind of given by design.
Yeah. So as far as the interfaces versus classes, I don't think it will be a problem in Kestrel to implement the listener classes. It might require like extra listener objects that basically redirect. One redirects to another or something, more or less, but it'll be fine.
Awesome. Stamp of approval.
All right.
So what we said, it was connection, listener, and connection factory, right?
Yep.
The factory, the connection, and the listener. Yeah.
Specifically, the property bag should be
Interface.
Okay. Ready to move on to the next?
Yep.
Right. Connection property collection should not use the name collection. I think that's completely reasonable. Do we have suggestions on what it might use instead of collection?
Hey, I'm not muted. In my at the bottom where I was trying to write down all the things everybody was talking about for get property, apparently I went with connection property set, which less implies a mathematical set or the set type collection and more just there's some stuff here. I think I certainly see us being a lot fuzzier on the word set than on the word collection.
Yeah.
Call it a bag.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
Well,
bags also have
interfaces.
what interfaces?
No.
I mean, I was actually thinking iConnection properties, just the plural.
Features. iConnection features.
I like iConnection properties.
Well,
Properties
it is iConnection properties.
Oh, good.
What we're talking about is the class that sort of default implements iConnection properties for users who just want something easy.
Oh, people who are lazy and want
Yes.
like nice APIs. Default.
Connection properties?
Yeah, connection properties. Default connection properties. I don't know.
It doesn't actually contain any default. It's just a reasonable like dictionary-based implementation, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't like default in the name if we can
We
avoid it.
use default for everything. I don't know why.
If it doesn't have the I, it's clearly the default, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we can
that's
call
kind of
it
what.
connection
use
property
default
bag
and
or
everything
set,
'cause it's the
whichever one
default.
works.
Can we just call it connection properties?
Yeah. In ASP.NET, it's often like the
Dictionary-based
default service, but yeah.
Yeah. Dictionary-based connection property implementation.
I mean, is it needed?
2.
It's helpful.
I mean, it's super helpful. It saves so much time.
Okay, I mean, like, is it a thing that people are going to realistically be implementing, or is it a thing that
No.
like 3 classes ever are going to do, and we don't need to worry about it again?
I mean, so this whole feature set is pretty low level. So like number of people isn't the concern per se. Like for testing, it's super useful to create a mock connection and have a mock property set to add some stuff to it, so you can test your fake in-memory version of this.
So what I found when implementing this is that you can usually find some way to sneak the allocation in for the iConnection properties interface somewhere else.
Yeah.
So if we're doing something efficient, we'd probably do that. But if you just want something super easy, you have a factory, you want to call connect, this makes it much easier to reason about. You know, you just create a collection, you add your properties that you want to that, and you call connect. You don't have to create a new type or anything like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wait, hold on. This thing is passed into connect.
Yeah.
Forget.
Passed into everything.
Connect,
so
bind,
we
accept.
use the same type. We
Yeah.
use the same
Yeah.
type to get features as we do to pass. Okay, that
Yeah,
might
it's
be fine.
on connection stream and it's an argument.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, connection property back, connection property set seems both fine. Connection property map might be problematic, but anything short seems reasonable.
I thought there's consensus on connection properties, unless like it's
I
too.
think for an interface, I think
simple.
it's fine. For a class, a plural name is kind of weird.
Yeah,
Unless
it
it's a
is.
static class.
I'd rather have set or bag.
Bag is fine.
I think bag kind of carries the connotation we want, right? Here's a bunch of random stuff you can query.
Yep.
Right.
And no description of unique or no assumption of uniqueness or linearity or.
Well,
I mean,
it just tells you it's stuff. Like it's
true.
not a
True.
structured connection or a structured
Yes.
collection. It's a stuff. Stuff goes in, stuff comes out.
Yeah.
should
Types
actually use the
go in.
word stuff.
Implementations go in.
Alternatively,
It's
the
not observed
suffix
word in
and
the table,
shit.
so
Connection properties and shit would be. I like that.
Right. Let's move forward with bag, unless anyone has a strong objection. Okay.
So that means we have iConnection property bag and connection property bag as a default.
Icon has connection properties.
So we're renaming the interface as well to iConnection property bag.
I mean, it seems certainly easier if your default implementation is the thing without the I.
Sure.
I think that's what most people would try to instantiate it.
Okay, that's fine. All right. iConnection stream should not use the name stream. We have both a stream and a duplex pipe on this interface, so stream is probably not the best name to begin with.
I need to scroll up, otherwise I could it. Actually, leave it.
weird.
Yep. There you go.
So connection stream is really a thing that has this.
As a stream or a pipe.
And a connection is basically.
Yeah, so it's split this way because of anticipation of future quick APIs. Basically, a quick stream does not have an endpoint on it. So we could, in theory, merge these two interfaces. It would just look kind of weird on quick.
Right, and I think last time we discussed doing that because since the endpoints are already nullable, like there's already the notion that they don't have to exist.
Yeah. My primary worry with that is like, is it important to draw a distinction between the endpoint not existing or more of a usage problem, like you're asking for an endpoint when you shouldn't be?
Right. I mean,
so with quick,
what fundamental difference between those? Like from what I do with it perspective, what do I do differently in those two cases when it's null in both?
I guess one would indicate a bug in your code, right? Asking the.
Yeah, so with quick, the stream itself does not have an endpoint on it. The overall connection, which can have many streams, is what has the endpoints.
Could it not be
I
copied from the
understand that,
connection?
What?
I know it's not necessarily important to the design of this interface, so maybe I'm digressing, but could the endpoints not be copied from the connection to the quick stream?
They could be. It's totally one possibility.
But I do think they should be merged, and the fact that they're nullable. Like, so I agree with Jeremy on this. Sorry if I interrupted your questions, Stephen.
No, you're agreeing with me, so I'll just shut up.
I'm fine merging these. I don't think it will be too bad if they're null or if they just copy whatever came from the connection.
It seems like, I mean, honestly, like if you look at the BCL, the general way we deal with these things is that we eventually may have an enum or something on the connection stream that says if it's a quick connection or not. Then we just document it. If it's returning quick connection, then these properties don't make sense. Because if you have too many different API shapes, then usually the problem that this creates is that you have now to expose more APIs to actually maintain the type as you're passing this. As opposed to everybody can exchange the iConnection stream or the connection stream. And then when we add new concepts, we don't have to change a bunch of APIs to take the other thing. Otherwise, if you have different type shapes, then you end up with having to effectively every time you add a concept.
Yeah.
And I think we also talked about having this one again be an abstract class, because there's the note here that interface implementers should make the stream and pipe be equivalent. And with the base class, it could be the constructor takes either the stream or the pipe, and it does the automatic wrapping of the other one.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I don't know if we would do that because there's some benefit in late constructing them, but probably some protected method to create them.
Sure.
The point still stands. You can effectively manifest the other.
Right. So interesting thing here is, like with Quick, you have a connection, and then on that connection you open multiple streams. So it'll look a little weird if we have this like multiplexed connection for Quick that returns something called iConnection.
Yeah. So we had the same debate in Castro, right, for doing HTTP3, and we actually introduced a new a class in the hierarchy that didn't have the stream and the pipe, that just had like the abort and other information, but didn't have the actual data. I think we called it I mean, it's a bad name. Base connection context. So I think we don't want to actually put the stream and the pipe on the thing that isn't the connection. Are we gonna have to have something in a hierarchy that doesn't have the stream and the pipe? That yeah, like we spent a long time debating this end to end in Castro, and we ended up with a different type hierarchy.
So I'm not following, David. Are you saying that the only thing that would exist on iConnection stream is connection properties?
And abort. So yeah, abort properties and basically undispose, yeah.
And so then you are supposed to blind cast or as cast to get to the thing where you can consume it?
So we have two different type hierarchies. One to get and so nothing ever returns the iConnection by itself. You either get a connection that has that. So you either get a multiplex connection or a connection. And if you want to do sharing between those two, you can take in the base. So you can create types that pass through the same base type, because those derive from a base connection context. But to actually get data from the actual connection, you have to either have a multiplex one or a connection.
Yeah, so to put things like a little bit more concretely, transports return either a multiplex connection context or a regular connection context. Both return a base connection context and Kestrel,
right?
Or both derive from. Sorry.
Yeah, derive from the base.
And Kestrel uses the base class for lifetime stuff. So for managing connection lifetime, shutdown, things like that. If you're not a server, it becomes less useful, but it has helped avoid a bit of code duplication in Kestrel for sure.
So another option of this, Emo, if you want to search for future quick amendments, you'll see kind of where I mocked what a quick API might look like.
In this issue?
Yeah.
And I think one of the problems was that once you have a quick connection, you end up accepting more connections from that thing, or more streams. And the streams are the things that can actually read and write data.
Yeah,
So
so
we
if
had
you
it.
look
Oh,
at,
sorry.
if you look at the interfaces I defined there, the iMultiplex connection and the factories and listener, one option that I came up with to kind of merge Quick and TCP into one set of interfaces would just be to have this iMultiplex connection be the iConnection. So with TCP, you would be able to call OpenStream or AcceptStream once, and it would start throwing after that. Whereas with Quick, you could just call OpenStream as many times as you want.
Actually, I like that.
So the downside with this is how, and maybe there's a way to do this, but how do you associate the streams on the same connection? Like, is that some sort of property that we're looking at?
It should be a property.
Yeah, I mean, each iConnection stream, it can have a property saying what connection it came from. That would be fine.
Yep.
I guess one downside of this is that someone might completely reasonably call OpenStream twice, expecting it to work, and it wouldn't sometimes. Like if you're on TCP.
Wait.
I don't know if that is necessarily a terrible thing, because Quick and TCP are so different that you really can't reasonably write code that works for both at the same time. So I think you would know from the get-go, like either you only have one stream per connection or you have many.
Yep. So we had the same debate in Castro, and we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to. We wanted to have one type hierarchy, so to reduce all the duplication, but then the code ended up being so different that we ended up with two type hierarchies because of the same reasons that Corey mentions.
I mean, to actually throw an interface at this, if the only thing that you really need the two things to unify for is for an abort method, then maybe that's like abortable connection. And then you put it on multiplex connection, and multiplex connection is just connection factory.
Yeah, but I think that might not work, right? Because the point is not that you want to call the abort method, right? The point is that at the base you just accept, because you don't actually open connections yourself, you just accept any connection, pass that around.
Is that the case? Because
it is. So
that means you're doing dynamic up and down casting, and it sounded like the only thing that you were holding on to the base class for was to call abort.
So yeah, one quick question, Corey. With the iMultiplex connection interface, is that supposed to also represent like a normal TCP connection? Is that what you're saying? And then you just call AcceptStream once?
Yeah, so that's one option. Is we take this multiplex connection interface, we say this is the connection interface, and with TCP you can only open it once.
So here's my hot take. Having done this like lifetime logic in Kestrel, I don't think we need to merge the multiplex connection and connection interfaces. I think we just need to make sure the stream and so basically the iConnection stream that you get from an iMultiplex connection is the same type that you get for like a normal TCP connection. As long as the connections themselves are the same, like it's not that hard to create a type that has like two constructors, one that takes like a multiplex connection and one that takes a normal connection, and then like lets you abort them both, like, and use that in our like lifetime management code. Like there's not that many servers that would need to do that.
But
yeah.
it kind of has the problem you're pointing out, right? Basically, in order to avoid casting all the time, you either have to have more overloads or have to do some crazy gymnastics in implementation to hold on to them.
I would argue that, I mean, as David was saying, this is pretty low-level feature to begin with. Like there aren't a ton of devs that are going to be programming against this, but among those, those people are not going to be, like, even less are going to be managing the lifetimes of both multiplexed and regular connections.
Yeah, I think casting sounds really bad to me. I don't like that. Ideally, these features should just work without things that you just have to know. But
So that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm not saying that you'd as cast anywhere, right? So what I'm saying is that you would have an iConnection thing that represents both, say, like a quick stream and a TCP connection. You don't really need to have shared interfaces between quick and TCP at the transport or listener layer. And there wouldn't be any casting. Like you would just have some sort of like type that just represents a connection lifetime that like could handle either a multiplexed or regular connection.
But what is the
And,
downside
like,
to the thing that Corey proposed? Because I mean, like in his model, you still have the same benefit, right? You don't have to do.
It makes the API ugly. It makes the API ugly for the case that is uncommon.
For TCP, yeah, exactly. So to make multiplex better, like now TCP, you have this extra kind of step you need to take to call accept stream, and you can only call it once, and you can't call it open stream, and it's kind of it's not the way you would design it if it weren't for multiplex. So it just adds some friction.
So basically, for TCP, I guess the idea would be you only have a stream property then, single one.
Right.
And and everyone's saying TCP, but it's basically any transport. So name pipes, TCP, like WebSockets.
Those are the canonical examples, like quick and TCP. But obviously, there are a lot of analogs to a streaming transport. Like,
So now we all know why I split iConnection and iConnection stream. Do we still want to merge those interfaces?
Yes.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
I think
again, the multiplex can still just copy the values up onto the connection.
I'm a bit confused as what's being proposed. Like, so the thing that we're gonna get back, the connection object is gonna have the thing that reads data, right? That's gonna be the shared primitive, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you you'll open a multiplex connection for quick, and then you'll open just a regular iConnection to get each stream.
Right. So that makes
sense. Kind of weird, but it makes sense.
And then that thing will have like abort and endpoint and all the not endpoint, abort and the pipe in the stream and the properties, right?
Well, abort. Yes, if we decide to make an abort an API, that comes later.
Didn't we decide to make an abort an API? Didn't we
I thought there's some general consensus.
We talked about it.
Something.
Pretty sure we agreed.
Reason to not.
There's a good reason to not. Okay.
Yeah. We have a very TCP-centric view of things right now. When we started using Quick, we realized, oh, you can't just abort. You have to have an error code. So do we pretend that 0 is what happens when you call abort? Do we expose a way to set that elsewhere? It seems like just having an abort parameterless API is kind of, it's very TCP focused.
Not TCP focused. So I think we need to get over the fact that this thing cannot be pure. If it was pure, it wouldn't be, like we couldn't do it at all. So we have to make some assumptions that some things will be unclean. And then for more specific things that are transport specific, we'll need to have different features for those. So for example, like so in HTTP core, HTTP context has abort, right? HTTP1 has abort, and on HTTP2, you can pass in a code for the abort, and guess what? That API doesn't work. But and we default to some argument. But that isn't a reason to not have abort at all. It just means if you want to do the more specific thing for HTTP2, you have to basically check to see what protocol you're on, and then do the protocol specific behavior. So I think we need to figure out, or we need to basically.
It essentially means that if you're using Quick, when you create a Quick connection, you'll have to tell us what to use if you just call abort.
Sure. I mean that sure as the default, right?
Yep.
Yep. But
which
that
is not
a strong reason to not have abort. In my opinion.
I was taken aback when I saw that Quick did not have some default, like, I don't know why I'm aborting, I'm just aborting.
Yeah.
And that kind of informed my decision here of like, oh, maybe we shouldn't have an abort be first class because it's different in other places.
Yeah, that's a fair first take, but I would assume that we could do something clever or pass in a default or assume something or throw. But I think abort is common enough in these networking APIs that you want something like that. in our experience
Sure.
in Castro for the last couple of years, at least.
And Quick doesn't have any kind of something went wrong. I have no idea what generic error code.
Unknown.
Yeah, there's a big discussion alias, and they don't feel tempted to change it. Right now, we're technically violating the spec in Kestrel.
Ridiculous.
It requires close integration between Quick and the protocol on top of it. Like HTTP 3 has defaults, but Quick does not. Anyway,
I think
okay.
everyone's just going to end up like choosing a random error code that doesn't exist and saying, oh, like, it's this one.
I think you're right, and that's what we've been trying to
Probably.
say. I can link you to the conversation.
Maybe enhance your calm or whatever that was from HTTP2.
I'm a teapot.
All right, so
419.
we agree to merge iConnection stream and iConnection, keeping the nullable endpoints on iConnection, everything else the same. Cool.
So what
We
I'm
agree.
a little bit at a loss is like visualizing the hierarchy, because clearly, let me actually try to sketch it here in the editor really quick, and then we can see whether you guys agree with my understanding, because it seems like for the multiplexed one, I think oh.
I think you're sharing just a window, not your.
Of course, I'm just sharing a window. Oh
Rookie
yeah.
mistake. Even.
Well, I have a
As
big
in, I
ass
did it my
vertical
first time.
monitor, and so I can't share the whole monitor. So I guess what I should have done is clip the monitor, but that doesn't work in Teams. Yeah. Oh yes. Here we go. But the people on the stream can't see it, but I'm not going to mess with OBS. No hope. Does this capture roughly what you said earlier? So basically merged connection and connection stream. But then we said we want to differentiate between the multiplex and the non-multiplexed one, which kind of means to me that the stream and pipe thing should be properties in the one case, and then there should be open stream and accept stream in the other case. And then I have no idea what this guy will return, but we could probably say this guy returns a connection, I guess.
Yeah, so this basically just kind of remixes the hierarchy I have already.
Yeah.
We're not getting anything new from it. I think the plan was to have an iConnection that has the stream and pipe on it as well.
Okay, so maybe
And then get rid of the I.
so
Exactly.
So basically, maybe I don't understand that. So basically, you're saying you want to merge these two. This is basically what we currently have, right? So like, what does merging look like?
So
move
the two endpoints onto connection stream.
Okay.
And then a multiplexed connection will have, instead of returning, well, it'll return iConnection stream essentially. Yeah. So it's correct how it is.
And then interface iConnection stream becomes
Yes,
possibly abstract class connection.
But to be clear though, then that means this guy doesn't have properties, and then you have duplication on whatever these guys are, right?
Oh, multiplex connection would have properties itself as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So that means basically these three here are now duplicate. That's basically the thing you get from the other.
So
Well, the local and remote endpoint would either be null or just return a copy from the multiplex connection. The connection properties might actually be different. They're probably not going to be cloned.
Yes, they're different. So Castro has a similar hierarchy. It has most best connection, base connection context, and connection context. But that's more of a type hierarchy. There's no interface inheritance here, or inheritance here that I see at least.
And then did the connection class when multiplex connections get added, will it gain a property of what the multiplex connection parent or source or whatever the name of the property is? Because you said some way to tie them back to each other.
I mean, it could. I I'm not convinced that there's a need to do that, but we
Okay.
would probably do that by having a connection property to expose that hierarchy.
Yeah, or I guess that would be you fish the multiplex connection out of your connection properties property bag. So
yeah.
So can you change the interface to a base class?
Of course.
Yeah, so iConnection stream.
You can just assume it's base class.
Okay. Can't see
it.
And then it's just connection because it's not a stream. It is a stream factory, but it's also a pipe factory and a
If you have a property, you don't really affect. Yeah.
And we don't want to have something in between both, like a base class that has the shared whatever.
Yeah, so that's my other question. So where would Abort go? Because
exactly.
Because if we know how to often have to add, a public void Abort here, and then we duplicate this as well. At that point, I would say you really, really want something in between to not have to duplicate this thing every single time.
Well, the interesting thing is with Quick, you can abort the connection and you can abort individual streams. So it actually kind of works to have it on both there.
No, I agree with that. But I mean, if you look at the thing that I'm proposing here, you have the same thing, right? Because the multiplex connection itself is a connection. And then the thing you return is also a connection, but you only have one class hierarchy where you define all of this stuff. You don't have to basically add the same member in two places. That's the thing.
So I'm okay with the base class. I think it's nice. It certainly makes some things easier for Kestrel, but I'm okay either way. I think it is pretty rare the people who will want to deal with both a connection and a multiplex connection in the same piece of code.
Generics.
Kestrel does though, so it would help that.
Yeah, Kestrel mixes both generics and the inheritance hierarchy to do code sharing for these two things.
I mean, it could be abstract class connection, then a concrete non-sealed probably class of simple connection and a class of multiplex connection, but seeing simple pop up all over the place would be a little weird, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
simple feels.
It's just like what I tried to model here is the concept, not the naming, right? But like,
right.
Like it's basically this, right? You have a common base, you have both derivatives, and then the one here is basically just chaining itself in.
Right, and then I guess those could be going back to words you've used before, that it's connection, context, connection, and multiplex connection. I mean, it is weird that multiplex connection would be a connection context instead of a connection, but
another weird one is you could call it I-single connection. It'd be weird that, an I-single connection is an I-connection, but it kind of, correlates to multiplex connection.
Yeah, so connection, single connection, and multiplex connection, and then multiplex connection can open single connections. I mean, it's not quite right, but
so if we have this distinction between a single and a multiplex connection now, then we should put the endpoints outside of the I-single connection. No.
I mean,
the endpoints being on the single connection.
Purist me says I agree.
I don't care that much, but it looks like we're kind of changing things a little bit, but not really gaining anything from the proposal here.
I'll tell you what, like local endpoint and remote endpoint are accessed so commonly that it feels. I mean, so you can put it on the base hierarchy, but I feel like it needs to be on the base and exposed as properties. Because I wouldn't want someone doing like TCP to have to fish out those two properties from the bag because they're so commonly accessed.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying put them in the bag.
I see.
I'm just wondering what this is getting us versus what is in the proposal. It's kind of just a little remix, but I'm not seeing benefit here.
Maybe I'm missing the point, but to me the value of this is my logical understanding of what you described is this. Like, because this to me models the actual relationship you have, whereas the other one doesn't seem to do that.
Plus Abort would go on the base,
would go here,
whatever.
Right? So so again, I'm not married to the names. I'm just married to the where does stuff live and who is deriving from whom, right? That's just to me the model of the thing you described.
Right. But I mean, I don't know that whether it be that iConnection is a base class of these two classes or it's an interface that two classes adhere to. I don't know that it's actually like the only time that we would really need the extra type here for unification is if somebody's really expected to reasonably work on both. Otherwise, having the two APIs that just look the same because they represent the same concept isn't terrible.
Yeah.
I agree.
So I don't know that we need connection. I think it's just, sorry, we need connection, but single connection and connection merge, and multiplex connection is just its own thing that has a bunch of things that look the same.
Sorry,
But
I gotta say though, not having any sharing, like, I guess you're forced to duplicate the entire type hierarchy.
it's just a question of like that's where I came back to who's gonna use
who does
this.
it? How
Is
common
there
is it?
polymorphism scenario, or is it just like, oh yeah, well both of them are things that can be aborted, but the abort means a different thing on the individual stream level versus the multiplexed level, and yeah, they both have endpoints, but they could mean different concepts. Like if they're just the same word, but they don't necessarily mean the same thing, the interface is really just duck typing at that point.
Yeah.
So in Kestrel, we do use abort polymorphically for like ungraceful shutdown of both like quick multiplex connections and like regular single connections.
And dispose, right?
Yeah, exactly, and graceful shutdown for that matter. So yeah, the use cases there, I would say it's not going to be the most common use case of people like writing middleware. But,
super common. We should add this feature.
Even in middleware, if you want to like trace like all new connections, whether it's like quick connections or TCP connections, like you could see it. If you just want to like log the endpoints.
Right, and so if there's a scenario, then carving out the whatever reasonable name for a base class, or saying, you know what, these four members are the interface, and we have the two classes that do it. That is reasonable. Like essentially, nothing would return the interface. They're just for if you want to have the polymorphic unification at your local level.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly.
Right, so if you wrote middleware to log this for all connections, you'd probably still like hook it up for your multiplex transport and your regular transport, but you could have like a shared function that like does the work.
Yeah, I mean, there aren't too many times where you'd want to abort either a stream or a connection with quick. Like they're two very different operations, right? But
we have shared code that does that in our like HTTP processing loop.
So just to bring it home, like we literally started with two different class hierarchies, and the code duplication like looked small at first, and then it got insane. And then we said, okay, let's bring it back in by adding the base, and then having a ton of shared code, and it actually helped a lot. So it wasn't,
if we didn't do this in the abstraction, we would do this ourselves more or less in Kestrel. Like we'd have to like build something on top of it that kind of had this hierarchy.
But it would require allocating per connection.
Yep.
Because there are base classes, not interfaces.
Well, right. I mean, it could be a struct, and it just holds both of them, and it's just 2 pointers instead of one everywhere. But
you're not wrong.
But I'm not opposed to having like a base I connection that has the properties and abort and the endpoints on it. If we want to try that out.
Yep. I have to go soon. Good meeting. Was there any other
big... figure it all out while we're gone.
Yeah.
It's going to be super easy. Don't worry.
Right. So part of like, so, on this one, now you have is connection as using the word Zemo has here and not as the final words. Is connection a class because there is actually reasonable code sharing between it and single connection and multiplex, or between single connection and multiplex connection on these? Or is this one actually an interface that single connection, which gets renamed to connection, and multiplex connection both adhere to? They both have an endpoint, they're abortable, and they have some properties. But if you wanted to do anything interesting with them, like look at data, now you need to actually know what kind of thing you're dealing with.
I think the primary thing we'd be enabling is maybe some form of logging, and then just maybe like a generic abort feature. So I don't think it would be bad to have both of these implement an interface.
Yeah. So I mean, like, either way's fine. I mean, like, it's so I guess really these are the three things that will exist, and the multiplex connection and the single connection are probably both classes. The other thing is another thing, and it's either a class that we figure out a good low-level name for it, or it's a interface, and they both adhere to it. In this case, I think that this would be an interface describing interfaciness, which is different than where the connection is like, well, you have a lot of like the stream and the pipe need to interact in this certain way, which really says that you want to sort of control the implementation on it.
Right.
Yeah, I'm fine with this. For what it's worth, we do use just a base class in Kestrel, but I think making it an interface is fine.
Yeah, like I don't have a strong preference one way or the other. I mean, the general guideline that we have essentially boils down to, with a lot of hyperbole, if a base class works, use it. So
if no one has an opinion, then can someone just decide? It's a base class. Done.
I mean,
okay.
That would be my. That's why I originally wrote it as a base class. The only
Yeah,
benefit, I
we
guess,
can...
with Jeremy's model was that you have fewer names, right? You basically get away with calling one I connection and the one connection.
True.
That's really the only minor thing I
Connection
can
base.
say.
Connection base.
Yeah, connection
Base
based,
connection.
and Jeremy police will immediately come and find you.
I mean, I'll
Hey,
leave that one to
Christoph.
Christoph to defend. I'll just tell you that the rule says base is not a good suffix.
Impul? Nah. Abstraction?
Hello, friends. I
Alright,
noticed
I'm
that the discussion is going in the right direction. So,
All right. Why don't we try with a base class? We can revisit an interface if it's needed for some reason.
So I would say that the thing currently labeled as single connection, using the rule of give the best name to the thing people are going to work with the most, it should be connection. And that if that means that now we need connection base as a suffix because we can't think of any other suffix, like I would say, personally, I would say that means that we considered things and there was no better name, and that's it. And most people aren't going to work with it at the base level anyway.
Love it.
But I'll let Christoph explain his grimace, and he can propose a name.
so actually, I have a question about, maybe I missed it. OpenStream opens stream for sending data, and accept is basically for receiving. Is that correct?
Well, either one can be bidirectional, but
either one can be bidirectional.
This is essentially socket.connect and socket.accept, but on a multiplexed connection.
I see. Okay, then I don't have a problem. Okay, yeah, that looks good.
All right. So unless somebody has a better name for the unified type, I think we have abstract class connection base, probably abstract class connection because you'll need the open pipe and open stream protected methods on it, and then the multiplex connection, which will do whatever it does whenever we get around to having multiplex connections.
Yep. Yeah, just to be clear, we're not proposing the multiplexed API as part of this review. Just planning for it.
We're just making sure that we're not boxing ourselves out of the ability to make it later.
Exactly.
Right, so then for clarity, this is what we are proposing, right? Is this the name still? I think you said
No.
base.
Connection base, and then single connection becomes just connection.
Yeah, I was thinking of maybe better names for connection base. It's hard, like connection better
Yeah,
not really. Connection lifetime.
Like anybody who can come up with a replacement name for connection base before we ship this thing.
I'll tell you what we used on in Midori, which was initially when I saw it, I was like, geez, this is weird. Over time, I'm kind of, and I was fighting it, and over time I kind of am warming up. we use the prefix A. So it would be A connect. It's kind of interesting because it means both abstract and also it's a word in English language. It kind of describes actually what it is.
Yeah, when I was in office, we had the same convention. If it was essentially if the class was being declared with the abstract modifier, it got an A, which is this is probably not the thing you're looking for. Or at least we used an A if it was regularly going to be, this is not the class you're looking for. It's here as part of making a tree work, but you should really never accept one of these, or.
But do you insert an N as well when the next letter is a U or something?
What?
Yeah,
Why would you insert U?
because in English you say, you would say
A user context,
Yeah.
or sorry, U is the weirdest one. A elephant versus an elephant.
yes,
And
exactly.
I see. Yes, when it starts, that would be a bit of a problem, but
Right.
So one thing about the base suffix, are users ever gonna be seeing, like, is it gonna be something returned from APIs?
No.
Collection base? Because I think this is the main problem with base. Base makes sense if you implement it. Totally makes sense. Kind of doesn't make sense when users, get this type back returned from something. They're like, base? What the heck?
Yeah, it sounded like to me, and so we can see if Stephen and Corey agree with this assertion, that the only people who would use the base class are complicated hosts like Kestrel that deal with a bunch of different things, or code that simply wants to log a new connection was made, and so they say, great, I don't care if it was multiplex or simplex. Simplex is actually the wrong word. But I just want to see a thing happened, and here it's 2 endpoints. And so it's a super minority case. It's never a return type. Probably we would never have anything public that took it as a parameter. It's just user code and infrastructure.
Yeah.
Right. It's like internal code might take it as a parameter. Like your own project might.
Yeah. But if it's basically not in public surface area of code that users will be calling, then I think it's fine.
Okay. Couple things. Hey, I'm not sure I've been properly introduced for everyone, but it's Stefan, so you can distinguish me from Stephen Tobe. And no worries. And then secondly, David Fowler is messaging me from outside the meeting to point out that we want this to work in Net Standard 2.0. I don't think there's anything stopping us since we've moved away from DIMs, but for SignalR, we want to use these types. So if we can make it like NuGet and Net Standard 2.0 compatible, that'd be great.
That's a great argument against DIMs.
Cool.
Yes, but I mean, other than that, I don't see a problem with there. Like, unless you want them to be implemented on some existing type, that should. Also, I think we just decided. I think your name is not Stefan because you're younger than Steven. Your name is now Stephen Bass. I think that's what we agreed on.
Okay, is that coming from the live chat?
No, that's what I'm making up.
All right. That's pretty good.
It's certainly better than a Steven, right?
Not and Steven? No, Mike, that grammar would be wrong.
Okay, we ready to move on to the next?
Yeah, so let me just copy and paste. So basically, what we now see on screen, we agree on, right? So let me just copy and paste this as the proposal.
The only thing that would be added would be some protected methods on connection base on connection to create the pipe and stream.
Right, because connection base will need something protected. It will need something virtual in order to make abort work. So it's either public, virtual void abort because it has no parameters, so it doesn't need template, or it gets protected void abort core.
Yeah,
well, I think connection and multiplex connection here would both be abstract as well.
Yeah, and so connection would be abstract class connection with protected virtual stream, open stream, and protected virtual iduplex pipe, open pipe. Because then the class is going to manage making the wrapper over whichever one got called first for the one that gets called second. Did I say all that right? Close enough.
Yes.
It doesn't matter. I think this
except it would be on the connection, not the stream, not the base.
Let me just copy this what we have right now, because I think now we're talking mechanics. I think the hard part was getting the shape.
Yes, there's some details to be filled in, but I think we got through the hard part.
So specifically about abort, I think there's some hard part left. Like the one thing that came up the last API review about this is that in Kestrel, at least, we want a way to initiate a graceful shutdown, which would mean like draining the output buffer. Yet, if that doesn't succeed within, say, a certain timeout or rate limit, we would want to be able to abort basically the connection after we've decided to send a fin. To use TCP parlance.
So you're talking about adding a close gracefully async.
Right, because you can't use those
thing.
if we want to abort, like not at least following good design guidance.
Well, right. So I mean, that sounds sort of like connection based is idisposable and iasync disposable, and then you would async dispose with a timeout and then move into abort. Of course, now you're in a troublesome situation of you've already started dispose and then you called abort. So
Async disposable
like,
does not have a timeout.
Yeah, there's no cancellation token. When I was saying that's more or less what Kestrel does today.
So yeah, so maybe you want abort, and I don't know if it's void abort or task abort async or.
Yeah, it would be the task.
Of course, the new guidelines are you should have synchronous API to mirror your asynchronous API. And in the right, so maybe you want, I don't know if that means you want graceful close, which is different than dispose. So that's a thing to think about.
Something like shutdown almost, if you're going to copy like socket names.
So there are 3 operations here that I can think of. Abort is like gracefully abort, make sure the other side knows, send whatever error codes you need. And then there's close gracefully, which is also like an IO operation. And then there's dispose, which is don't do anything, just stop and release any resources. So the other side might time out, something like that. Is that kind of what you're thinking, Stefan?
Yeah, something along those lines. I think, making it idisposable, like after you've completely gracefully shut things down or abort is perfectly fine. But yeah, we should have a way to do both before disposing.
Mm-hmm.
Another question, like Jeremy, you pointed out that like the guidelines are now to have synchronous APIs for all async APIs. I know we're doing that for like iasync disposable and disposable here for like HV client scenarios, but I don't think we're doing that for anything else, and I hope not. Like for like
it was a conscious choice to not do that.
Yeah, I hope for this kind of low-level networking stuff, it's new code. Like you shouldn't be blocking on things like.
I mean, right. So you say that, but there are people who like you're just writing a simple console app. You don't care about like you're going to do everything in order. You don't care about all the awaits. You just say do this, and when you're finished, we're moving on to the next thing. Like. Low-level code especially needs to be hyper-flexible here because you don't know what your caller wants to do. That's why we have the guideline of you should offer synchronous to mirror your asynchronous.
So if I would argue if you're in a case where it was acceptable to call like a synchronous version of accept, then calling .result wouldn't be that much worse. Like you're still blocking a thread for a very long time. I mean,
I guess
that's a big difference. So
I guess that's fair. Except is special because you're now literally waiting on work.
Well, also I think there's a very big difference between calling that result and these APIs or these hypothetical sync APIs, especially that they are on sockets. Sockets actually have native synchronous APIs in operating systems. And if you call that result, there's this soft deadlock issue that we wrote lots of articles about. And
yeah.
So and natively implemented synchronous APIs would actually not be subject to the soft deadlock. Yes, they are inefficient from machine resource consumption perspective, but at least they don't deadlock.
Yeah, I'm not denying that there is a difference between like, sync APIs down the OS to something that would need to be completed by another thread that would, potentially the soft deadlocks. But I'm saying if it's acceptable to block on accept, you better not have many threads doing that. So hopefully you have other threads available to complete.
I mean, because, right, so accept being the state of like, I'm now going to sit here and just twiddle my thumbs until somebody wants to talk to me. I could buy an argument that there's very little scenario at all for that being a a synchronous flow, but I'm going to connect to something and send them this data and then shut down, like that seems like a thing that someone could do, could end up doing in code that's already contracted to be synchronous and they can't change it, and now they're doing async over, or they're doing like sync over async over sync over, and it's like, call the method that represents the flow you're in.
So we had a pretty big discussion about this before bringing this to API review. That argument was the first one to get called out, was like, if we want existing users to adopt this instead of like replace their sockets code with this, then what are they going to do for all their synchronous APIs? The sort of ultimate decision on the NCL team and ASP teams was, if you're using this connection abstraction, we expect you to have an async workflow. And if someone calls your sync APIs, just throw.
Can I propose that we table the async sync discussion for another time? Because I think, like, let's get the rest of the proposal maybe into shape, because it seems like there's a lot of controversy around many other areas here. So let's just pick some battles here that we can actually deal with.
I'm fine with that.
Okay. Also, it's kind of orthogonal, right? I think once we have the shape for async, I think agreeing on whether we do sync and if so, what it looks like is probably easier than.
Do we want to type out what we're thinking for shutdown and abort? Like, should we add some like placeholder?
Yeah, I'm fine having an abort async, a close gracefully async.
Yeah,
I guess each one would have cancellation token as well and return value task.
Yeah, that all seems fine to me. Lost the screen.
You should be back now, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what would abort look like?
So abort async takes a cancellation token, returns a value task.
I mean, is it value task? You expect it to complete synchronously?
Potentially, yeah, for sure.
I mean, sockets
APIs do.
Instant. It's always synchronous for sockets. Other things it may not be.
Okay. Oh, right, because abort is
just
tell the OS
socket,
we're done. It'll flush a fin packet at whatever rate it feels like doing it, and you're done talking to the OS at that point.
Exactly.
Basically, yeah. Like if we receive any more packets, the OS will send back an RST, kind of, that kind of stuff.
But at that point, it's all the OS's problem, and your flow was synchronously tell the OS I'm done, and then move on.
Yeah, I mean the process gets shut down, the OS will take care of it.
Right. But then shut down gracefully, or graceful shutdown, or whatever you want to call it. Presumably that one is task, because the whole intent here is it's going to do work that's not going to complete synchronously.
Right. So like in Kestrel's case specifically, like we actually wait for our application buffers to flush, when we dispose.
Yeah. And then there's just the OS calls of it'll call shutdown and then close the socket. So those are both synchronous. So it could very well complete synchronously for a lot of workflows.
Mm-hmm. Good.
But first your graceful shutdown is gonna first flush all your buffers, which would be synchronous operations.
But maybe buffers are flushed.
So this OS has its own send buffer. So for a lot of workflows, actually all the writes you do to a socket are synchronous anyway.
Yep, exactly it. And like even when the process shuts down, the OS will try for a while to flush your buffers for you if you try to like gracefully close and stuff. So
okay, just the value task it solves some problems at the expense of others, and the only time it should really be used is when you expect in the average case that it will have completed synchronously. Like essentially a test should call a value task thing and assert completed synchronously. And if that is false, then you've designed the API wrong.
Right. I mean, obviously use value task for things that could be async.
We're intending it here more for optimization, thinking that there's no reason you would ever want to cache one of these tasks, for instance. And it's a low-level enough API that we think people can use it successfully without, the nasty bits that come with value task.
Yeah, well, I mean, the worst possible thing you can do with value task is be optimal, and have the completion handler, because that's when really all the dangerous bugs of value task come into play.
Yep.
And so it's make sure that we're like, yeah, the flow that we put for people is, if you expect it to complete synchronously, then value task is an okay thing to consider. And then we didn't even talk about the fact that you can custom handle the async state.
Yep.
But I would say for these networking APIs, like there's so much buffering that goes on. Like these things complete synchronous a lot, or complete immediately a lot, if that makes sense.
That's presumably flush is an operation that you expect. Like, does that make the process wait until all the send buffers have drained?
Nope. That just makes sure it waits until the buffer gets small enough, at least in Kestrel's case, and it's usually synchronous or usually immediate.
Flush would basically wait for all of the data to be handed off to the OS.
Fair enough. I mean, okay, so essentially, essentially, it's anywhere that the word value task appears. The question will be, and you expect this to complete synchronously? And certainly, my notion of that, like from an application author, my expectation is flush means it's waiting until all the data has actually been put on the wire, which means that it probably is not a synchronous operation.
The funny thing is, there's no way to know that,
That's
using
fair.
typical socket APIs.
That's fair. I'm just the level of what the functionality describes itself as doing, and what the and such. And emo, there's usually an A in async.
Yeah.
Abort sync
and
shouldn't
then-
return a value task.
And then close async.
Oh, and if abort doesn't return a response, then you shouldn't need value task at all, because you can just return task.completed task, and you still have no allocation. So value task would only mean that you're explicitly intending to do the dangerous thing.
There ends up being kind of a consistency argument. I don't know, maybe not. We in ASP.NET, we've definitely been leaning on value task. There's the ability to pool them, which is nice for performance improvements. Now, in an abort path, obviously not very important.
Right.
But
And yeah, I mean, the avoiding allocation you can still get by, like, you have to do manual work around your task flow, and then understand that you can return task.completed task. But
right. Yeah, I'm saying
actually,
even
async,
in the asynchronous case. But yeah,
the
I
async state machine generator will do that for you. If your first walk through the thing ends up hitting return, it returns task.completed task with no allocation.
Yep. And value task, depending on what your options, will also have its state machine pooled, right? So there's still some benefit there, even if you're using an async method.
But yeah, our guideline on that one is avoid the non-generic value task.
By the way, is it something that users would actually await, or it's more like a async fire and forget?
You would.
So there were three cases I outlined. You would have abort, which is like, actually, if you need to do I/O to tell the other side you're aborted, then do that. And then dispose would be distinctive from that by saying, don't do any I/O, just fail as quickly as possible. So the other side of the connection might be timing out or something.
Yeah, I understand that. What I'm asking is, in typical use, would people actually await this abort? Or they would just call it and say, I don't care when it actually completes.
We would await this, at least for HTTP3. I think it's going to be very specific to whatever library is using this.
Well, I mean, I guess to restate Christoph's question, what's the scenario for caring that abort is done?
Yes.
Here's the scenario. The connection, owns a pipe, and it wants to make sure the pipe is completed in some background thread by the time abort async completes, so that your Kestrel's connection lifetime manager, after it aborts like all the connections knows that all blocks are returned to the memory pool, and therefore it's safe to dispose of the memory pool.
But that sounds like it's just part of the implementation of the virtual abort. That's not a caller of the abort method.
The caller wants to know when the task completes so they can know when to dispose of the memory pool.
The caller will be responsible for disposing the pool?
In the case of Kestrel, when
But-
you're the same.
I mean, what couldn't you
Use an internal API?
I mean, if you're putting the notion of when you're done sounds like it belongs to the connection, and so that would just be the last line in abort async is I'm done. Go put this memory back. Like somehow the connection got the memory pool memory. So,
Well, what if you're like returning stuff and dispose or whatever? Like I'm seeing this as like you call await abort async and then you call dispose. I mean,
right. So if the scenario is that you should not call dispose while abort's still running, or that the abort may not, or if you call dispose while abort's still running, it may not finish, and you want it to finish, then that's the scenario is not getting to dispose yet.
Yeah.
I
And by
think
the way,
it's safer. I know Quick has like an async abort API, right? Like for streams.
Yeah, it does. That's where we would use this while awaiting the abort.
and by the way, the reason I was asking is I wonder whether there's a difference in guideline that we should have for those fire and forget methods. Maybe it's okay to use non-generic value task, because it's like in a lot of cases the user kind of doesn't care. They will not await. You don't have many of these problems with value tasks.
But what's the difference at that point from value task and task? Because value task, if you use the async state machine generator, if it goes async, it returns a task, and if it doesn't go async, it returns task.completed task. So
Well, what the implementation of the abort method would return value task, which is, one less allocation. And then since nobody awaits, nobody will, basically the state machine won't be generated for, if you don't await, correct?
the state machine's generated in the assembly that defines the method. It doesn't know what the caller is going to do. It's going to allocate the task object if it goes async, no matter what.
In the method that the caller is calling, if the method is async and actually awaits. But if nobody ever awaits on this one, like basically the whole method that calls the abort is not async, you basically don't have an allocation.
Can I propose tabling this until we have Steven around, because I know
Sure.
he knows all the ins and outs of value task issues
Sure,
at least better than me.
that's fair. I can tell you the flow that he told me to write in the book, which is if you're using non-generic value task, you're Steven.
Well, we can wait for him to give
Yeah.
blessing or not. So there you go.
Yeah. And since Stefan has identified that he is not Steven, he's not granted Steven authority.
Right. I need to be a little bit more derived before I can get there.
I think the
Okay,
book just
so-
has to be updated to Steven base. I think that will solve the problem.
So Emo, I think to add, we would add a close gracefully or shut down gracefully async API here.
Hope
Yes,
we don't
please.
call it like that.
Yeah, I hope we call it something else too.
Graceful shutdown. I mean, graceful shutdown sounds more like a method name than shutdown gracefully.
Really? One's more like a verb and the other's like a noun. But
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. So.
Well, because graceful is an adjective on, or I guess is an adverb on shutdown when used as a prefix. So there's still the verb, which is shutdown. Methods have to have verbs; they don't have to start with verbs.
What about
yeah, I guess shutdown's both a verb and a noun, which makes it confusing. You add the adverb and it sounds like an adjective, but you're really getting in the weeds.
what about complete?
Yeah, that's kind of similar-ish to pipes. Pipes
uses
system IO
that
pipelines.
verbiage, but it also uses it to complete with an error, right?
It does, yeah. You could follow a similar pattern and make a complete method that takes an exception, and that makes it abortive.
So I may contradict myself, but to me, close is basically it's a graceful shutdown.
Yeah, but we can't have close and dispose doing different things.
Yeah,
I'm okay.
That
with
is true.
Yeah.
That's why I said I would contradict myself when I said last time I said that we shouldn't have close and dispose, especially doing different things.
Fortunately, I'm pretty sure David Keane is not watching, but if I will send him notes that says we will make a dispose call abort and close do something else and see how he reacts.
All right, but we want something. We do need like a cancelable, like graceful way to.
I'm fine with graceful shutdown async. We can
Yeah.
change the name later if we find something better.
Jesus, that's a long. I mean, like, do you expect many people to call this? Because that's.
I'm also okay with
We
shutdown.
could just call it shutdown.
Yeah, I was about to say. I mean, shutdown seems already better than abort.
All right, let's do shutdown async.
Like when I shut down on my computer, that's a lot more graceful than when I pull the power cord.
Usually one leads to the other. Frequently during a message it says, please don't turn off your PC.
I mean, for symmetry, we could call abort shut up async. We have shut down and shut up.
This surface looks fine for me. You have to add iasync disposable.
Oh yeah, that was the other question I had.
But, yeah.
And then, okay, so there are a couple options here. We talked about complete, like kind of copying the pipelines option. You could also just say like, I'll shut down async with like a pre-canceled token, and it becomes aborted. That's a little weird. Yeah, I think that's okay.
Calling with a pre-canceled token means it should throw a cancel or it should throw operation canceled exception.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Seems to be the most logical thing, at least. Yeah.
It's kind of brainstorming there. We've done that internally in places, but I agree that's probably bad practice.
So what about the following? If we had a parameter to a method, the parameter would be graceful or not. And then could the method be called close? Like, would anybody get confused that it's different semantics than dispose if it had a parameter? Like, it would be close async and takes a parameter called gracefully.
I think I like that the best so far.
Yeah, but then
don't we have a general rule saying don't have a method take a parameter if the parameter changes the essence of what it's doing?
It's just a definition of essence.
Right, because I mean, like OpenSSL in their library for and for a TLS stream, they do have just the one shutdown, and then they have a state on the thing of if shutdown is abortive or graceful. So if we wanted to have close and then figure out what sort of Boolean parameter for if this is close or abort, because they're both close the connection. It's just one of them is and don't talk to anybody, and the other one is and say goodbye politely before you leave.
Yeah.
The problem that I have with that is, like, let's say we take a Boolean parameter. Are we really saying we're not defaulting this? And I think as soon as you're defaulting it, the argument goes out the window.
We could not default it.
But you want everybody
okay
to
with
gracefully shut down, right? Generally speaking, right?
I would almost want an enum rather than a bool.
Well, by the way, and also like what? So the dispose semantics are not graceful shutdown.
It's not
dispose. Dispose is don't do any IO, just close the resource.
So it's basically it's abort.
So on socket
abort.
It would abort. On quick it would cause the other side to time out. So it would be neither abort or shutdown.
Yeah, in general, I think we have a
out.
problem because we have basically 3 ways to shut it down, and everybody would be confused which one is which.
And that could be what Corey said of an enum, and then the enum is shutdown, immediate, shutdown, graceful, shutdown, abort, and dispose is shutdown immediate, which is don't don't talk to anyone and just be done.
Except the problem is if it's quick versus non-quick, then that's harder to do when it's on the base. Like, can you on quick even do an abort, basically?
Yes, this could
Yeah.
work for anything, I think.
Also, I think that from a perspective of what's happening on the other side, we may have three different semantics. But from a perspective of the caller, I think they only have two cases. Am I willing to wait or not? Correct?
Well,
Yeah, I guess if you boil it down enough, it's kind of that.
but abort in the quick case is still going to send something, right?
Yeah, and the problem is you don't have the OS doing that sending when your process closes, so you have to wait if you want the fin to get to the other side.
Because there are three different things. Assuming I understand what this means, and so maybe I'm wrong. There's, do you want to not wait on anything? Do you want to possibly wait on not messing up the other end of the connection? And there's, do you want to send any outstanding data before telling the other end of the connection that you're going away? Because abort versus shutdown, I think, would not flush any other buffers. It's just going to immediately send the, by the way, I'm leaving. We're not friends anymore.
I'm just saying between those first two cases, I wonder whether there's actually a practical difference and developers would, want one or the other. Or it's just, I'm not willing to wait, shut down, or try to send the data. And yes, there are implications of, choosing the first one, and they are different depending on the protocol.
And I mean, certainly the notion of the shut down immediately and don't send anything / which really just comes down to I don't want to wait, is just don't await the task.
Yeah.
But so I don't know. Things to consider.
Yeah, at least for HTTP 3's sake, there is a difference between all three. They're all being used right now.
No. So yes, there is a difference. My kind of thinking is there is a difference, but will anybody literally care? Like, will you ever find the developer on this side of the wire?
Oh yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I want one, but not the other. Or they will be just thinking, do I want to wait or not? That's all they will be thinking.
Yeah, I'm not thinking from HTTP, the protocol perspective. I'm thinking of our actual implementation. So we've actually used each 3 ways to close a connection in our current implementation of it. So right there, I can tell you that we found a use.
Well, you're saying there are 3 different ways and you expose them in 3 different APIs. I'm saying, will the callers ever call one of those 3 APIs?
Yes,
They're being called.
HTTP client would be the caller of this that would expect to have 3 different APIs.
Really? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, well, in this case, we need to expose all 3.
At which
Crazy
point I
question.
agree with Corey that an enum sounds attractive to me.
Yeah, I think close async with an enum and a cancellation token, the tri-state enum, is good. I was going to joke about adding like an iConnection property options to this, but it's a joke, guys. So we won't.
Yeah, I think the moment we add enum, it solves the problem of people getting confused how it's related to dispose.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so those 2 collapse down into close async, and then they take a connection close type parameter, which is immediate abort and graceful shutdown. So probably graceful shutdown gets the 0 because it's probably the most common case.
So one thing that it would be good, I don't have a concrete proposal, but it would be good if one of the names of the enum values kind of pointed people in the direction that this is the same behavior as dispose. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so immediate would just be like dispose or something, or immediate dispose.
Graceful shutdown, abort, and dispose.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, maybe just suffix, and add dispose to the original names that you said.
So Corey, in the HTTP client code that's calling abort, is that taking a quick like abort status code? Yeah. So that would actually be like the one reason to take something like iConnection properties, is so you can still use that method, but it doesn't
Yeah, so
feel great.
Quick requires a status code. HTTP3 is very strict on the status code, so we can't just send a default. So we do need some way to specify it here.
Well, but presumably in your HTTP3 stream generator, you would just build it where you know that abort means you're going to send 762, or I have no idea what HTTP3 looks like. So
yeah, there are like 20 different codes that you can abort with. We only use like 5 of them, but
right.
The other thing is like this connection, will be application protocol agnostic, right? So like if you want to set specifically like an HTTP3, error status code, like the transport shouldn't have to, like the creator of the connection shouldn't have to know about that.
Yeah, I think I would be okay either saying add a connection properties to the close async method, or say that for quick, if it needs something other than the 3 defaults, you need to have this iQuick abortable property that you pull out of the connection.
So here we would delete shutdown async. So that those are the 2 possibilities. Yeah, you either add a specific feature to like the connection properties, or you take basically the parameter in the connection properties bag to close async.
So if dispose is going to be literally just drop everything on the floor and walk away, then presumably now you don't want to be async disposable, because you don't have an async notion of dispose. Like, and then that would tell people, like, if you want to do the graceful shutdown, the last line before the end of your using is await close async connection close method graceful shutdown.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I'm fine with that.
If it was going to be graceful, it would be nice to be like, oh, you just put the connection in a using and that will send the fin. But if it's going to be immediate,
sure.
That's where it comes down to which behavior of dispose are you trying to, which behavior is dispose going to get, because that'll dictate
I
whether or
think
not you
it
want
being
the async.
immediate is fine. I think that's probably the most like logically consistent. So just having iDisposable is good. Like as long as you have this close async that can do like all the things.
Yeah. I think we can get rid of async disposable here.
Right, so now I'm confused. So which one is immediate now?
Dispose. Dispose is just call all the native release this handle things and walk away.
Mm-hmm.
The other
It's
names...
not matching what we do on like file writer or file stream of, oh, you had some stuff that hadn't been flushed yet, flush it and then close the handle. Dispose on this is just walk away.
So based on the current code I see on the screen, Emo, you're going to get rid of shutdown async and async disposable.
Yep.
Ah, yes, that was what I wanted. And then the enum members are ordered abort, graceful shutdown, immediate.
Graceful shutdown would be first, like the most common thing.
Just in case someone uses the default keyword.
Yes, if someone writes the word default there, let's let graceful shutdown be the default.
If we do graceful shutdown, abort, and immediate, it seems like we do progressively less work, which means it's probably safer, right? Even abort seems better than just walking away, right? Because at least you let the caller know that.
Yeah. I mean, the caller is going to see it in IntelliSense in alphabetical order. The only real question is which one gets the 0 value, and I think graceful shutdown should get the 0 value.
Sure, but I mean, like in Doxy, they're still ordered by enum value, right? And so I guess the order still has value even for the non-zero case. At the point.
Yeah, fair enough.
Should at least make it meaningful.
Yeah. So graceful, then abort, then dispose.
Good with that.
And then dispose we call immediate, right? That was
the dispose. Like Christoph had the statement that it would be good to be able to easily identify which method dispose is using, and so I think that's why we said just call it dispose.
I mean, you arguably don't need dispose because there's dispose, and dispose doesn't need a cancellation token because it's now immediate. So
Yeah, should we just get rid of the dispose part of the enum?
I kind of want to.
Well, I
Where
think this
where
is
is anything this? Oh my gosh,
But-
where is anything dispose?
But then now you're back to
What did you guys do?
you have dispose and close, and they do.
I said make good choices, not like this. Like if you take away dispose, you take away the super nice pattern, like using away. Like don't do
No,
that.
We're not saying take away dispose.
Oh, okay,
No,
that's
it
fine.
does. No, it is
Say-
taking away that pattern, David.
Take away
No,
the connection
add it
close
back.
method dot dispose.
Add
here's
it
the
back.
problem.
Add back the beautiful await using. This is
So here's
not nice.
the problem in the nutshell, is that to have dispose like gracefully close the connection, which is what you'd
Yeah.
want if you're using it and using like that, it has to flush stuff in some situations. That isn't cancelable because I dispose async or async disposable doesn't have that, right?
Right.
And we can't call any methods after we start calling dispose async because like that's a rule. So
Sure. Sounds good to
that
me.
means that like dispose gracefully shutting down the connection is just a no-go.
What? I don't. What? Wait, we have a thing called async disposable that has this behavior literally everywhere in the BCL. You're saying we can't have close and dispose because it's confusing?
No, well, we just removed async disposable because the statement was dispose is not going to flush. It's just going to drop the connection and walk away.
Why not have it flush and then have close be the override to do other stuff?
Because we can't call
basically,
anything after dispose.
So what?
You can't abort your dispose then. You can't decide the flush is taking too long and you want to call abort now because you've called dispose already.
Like this is an issue for everything in the BCL. How are we not like worried about that?
Well, we are
So
worried
we're
about
gonna
that.
fix it.
One of the problems in the BCL is that close and dispose don't do the same thing, and it certainly has a problem that flushing is also not always what you want, right? Because for example, like as soon as you nest, for example, stream writers and streams,
Oh,
if you dispose the inner one, it also disposes the outer one. So there's definitely an issue where sometimes you just want to flush, but you don't want to dispose. So coupling these two together has
know.
certainly not been a winning proposition, I would argue.
but we're gonna solve it here in this new abstraction and leave it broken everywhere else. That is like this thing is gonna wrap things
Definitely.
under the covers called dispose async and just hang and can be canceled. I don't understand how fixing it on this abstraction is like helping anything.
Well, I mean, so depends on what you want to do, right? So like if you want to say what, so like I guess from my point of view, the question is, what do you want to do when somebody calls dispose on the connection base? What do you want the behavior to be?
Hang forever.
He wants it to flush. He wants it to be great.
Uncancelable. Just do it. Keep it as bad as it is today because that's the choice we made for the BCL. And then add close as an override or abort or whatever it is. And why is abort like not fire and forget? Why is it asynchronous? I guess that's fine.
Wait, provides an
That's
async
fine.
API.
Yeah. Yep. Sure. Okay. Yep. That's true.
And when the process shuts down, like, so if you don't await it, like, it might just not get sent because it's like an application library.
What if you don't care about the result? You just ignore the task.
Then you don't await it. Like we
Get
have
warnings everywhere.
So okay, so you just said you want dispose the synchronous version to effectively block and do whatever it takes to get rid of the data and then close gracefully. I guess
Yep.
the same applies for dispose async then, except that you would do an asynchronous flush
Right.
that is
Yep.
not being to be cancelable.
Yep. Because that behavior is what we have today.
Okay, because yeah, what was said while you were gone is that dispose would just drop the resources and not send an explicit abort for protocols that require it and not flush any outstanding buffers. And if that's the case, because that's why in our close method up here we had graceful abort and dispose means just walk away.
Right.
Tell the OS I'm done with this socket, move on with life.
It seems like what
and-
David is advocating for is that dispose is graceful shutdown.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, is what he's advocating for. And to make that work today in Kestrel, and it does work today, we will sometimes call abort after we call dispose.
And certainly there's a model where it's fine. You call close async, graceful shutdown, cancellation source dot from time 5 or whatever.
Yeah.
And then when that aborts, then now you call close async immediate or close async abort and move on with life. The problem is all of these are actually all disposing operations, but the fact that it's not the word dispose means that it needs to internally manage its own state.
Sure, but
I
then
think that the distinction here would be you would use async disposable if you just want graceful shutdown, but if you want to be able to cancel that, you would call close async with a cancellation token, and then your dispose would just be a no-op.
Right.
And it's fair to say that like if you're managing like both sides of the connection and stuff, there are a lot of times like you're not worried about canceling a flush. Like it's pretty rare to do anything.
Right. So I mean, yeah. So it just comes back to what you want the behavior to be. The if it's graceful shutdown, then it's async disposable again. If it's drop everything on the floor, then the lack of async disposable tells someone you probably want to call await graceful shutdown.
Okay, so let me try to reason about this again. So the current this current pattern is I call close async, and if I want an abort does what? Abort says kill the connection and don't wait, don't flush.
So graceful shutdown is flush. Abort
Right.
is do any IO to tell the other side that you're aborting, like sending error codes. Dispose is, totally ungraceful. We're just going to close resources and not send anything.
Yeah. The same as the process shutting down, but with now the process shutting down.
And everything can be canceled.
Well, except for dispose.
Well, dispose really not cancelable, yeah.
Because all it's doing is calling, close handle and just moves on with life.
But then,
Right, but what you're suggesting, David, and it seems like we're getting some buy-in for this, is that dispose will be graceful, it will flush, it's not cancelable. Deal with it like by calling close async if you really care.
Yeah. So dispose would then be close async, graceful shutdown, CT none.
right.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. That does seem nicer for the average user.
And I think that also kind of solves our problem that we had earlier, because now literally dispose closes, like basically dispose calls close, kind
Yeah.
of, right?
Right.
So
Yeah,
the only thing we could do, we could
basically
either have a close async.
Right. So you could leave connection close method as being graceful, abort, and immediate, like we had previously discussed, and just dispose as graceful instead of immediate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Because that gives you the way that you can say, look, I want you to terminate yourself, and you're not allowed to send IO because whatever reason. Like, so I don't care that the protocol says to send IO. Let's just pretend we've died and move on.
Mm-hmm.
The other spicy conversation you missed out on, David, is say you want to provide a quick abort status code, as you call close async abort. What's the way to do that? Do we add like connection property options to close async?
Oh my god, property bag again.
I mean, I think the answer in that one is you either have polymorphism and you're casting and you're doing quick, and so you have a quick connection, or if you're using the property bag, I think Stefan, you suggested this of you fish out the quick connection status property bag, which has a mutable what's my close code.
Yep.
But at that point, you're working with the protocol, and something more complicated has to happen.
Yeah, you can definitely use the connection properties on connection base to like set some state or actually do the abort if you really want to.
So what is the suggestion then? Should we add the enum bag and have a different?
Yeah, so we'll
Add-
have the enum with slightly different names, and then say dispose async will just call close
Graceful
async.
shutdown with no cancellation.
So then one thing at a time. Let me stop. So the enum.
Does that
So what were the
does
names?
that mean that dispose will call close async and just ditch the task?
Well, I mean, it'll return dispose the synchronous method.
Yeah.
Or block.
I mean,
Will it block?
It should block.
It'll
yeah.
block, right?
Yeah.
I mean, or we could remove it.
If you
That
want a
can happen.
non-blocking dispose, you call close async immediate, and then dispose will be immediate.
Okay.
When you call it out.
So yeah, so then the enum emo is I think graceful shutdown, abort, and immediate. and then dispose does the default of that, which is graceful shutdown.
The super spicy food for thought for the future. Like, we're gonna need this feature on a bunch of other things. And maybe, like, longer term, we should reconsider like thinking about streams and stream writers and like those types of APIs. How do we do the same behavior for those things? Where I don't want to flush, I don't want to hang. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, the easiest way is you just drop your reference to it.
Yep.
Like, you just stop talking about it, and eventually the GC eats it and it doesn't do anything. So
Totally. Or it gets finalized.
Okay, this looks good to me.
Yeah, I mean, of course.
Well, do we want to default it? Because then you're kind of confusing close with dispose.
Well, I mean, if we default it like this, then we basically tell people what dispose does. Dispose calls close async with no argument.
Yeah, that's true.
You guys discuss half closed actions, or is that more of a?
That would be another property bag thing.
Yeah. So today, like we used the pipe we intended to use the pipe to signal half close because it has that kind of notion of closing input or output. But maybe it's worth like discussing that. I mean, it's fine. Too late.
I mean, if that's just more modes on connection close method, then that's just more modes on connection close method. So
yeah. So yeah.
I think it's the same problem as a quick abort code. Is that now you're in TCP land and you should pull out a TCP specific interface.
Yep, that's fair. Or well, it doesn't have to be TCP specific. The feature itself could be has support half close connections.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
This is awesome progress. I'm super happy. We agree on everything. Camera off?
Okay, can you guys hear me? Sorry. I would compare the half close thing to almost like remote and local endpoint. Like, is it common enough for streams, and transports to be half closable that it's something we should make first class?
Right. And
since we have half closable, but only kind of. So it would be another one of those features that would just be very opinionated about TCP workflow.
But now we have a base class, we can always add it in the future. Ha ha ha.
Exactly.
Well,
right, Christoph?
We are allowed to add things to enums, right? Like, that's not breaking.
Correct. You can't renumber things, but you can add.
Yeah.
Although other people will be presumably implementing this close async, and if we pass in a random new value, who knows what'll happen?
Good things.
that is a problem. Like, you'd almost like, what should they do? Like, back to graceful shutdown? I have no idea.
Okay, we're basically out of time again. I think we'll have to schedule a third of these.
At least we're converging on something. I mean,
we're making progress.
I mean, we did resolve of looking at what before we had on of the issues. It's we took the unresolved discussion about interfaces versus classes, and I think we've landed somewhere that we're all at least content with. We renamed connection property collection. We renamed connection stream. We collapsed some interfaces. We figured out how to add abort. Do we do disposable factories, and are they one type or two? We didn't talk about yet, but we didn't make negative. We made positive progress.
Yes.
And we got rid of a lot of the unresolved issues.
Time to throw in a few wrenches. Just kidding.
Really good. This is really good.
All right, I'll commit those as notes, and then I'll send them out.
One more round.
Thanks, everybody.
One more?
Awesome.
I think it's two more.
One more round. This is such good progress. I'm gonna leave next time just for like 10 minutes, and then come back and jump in and be like, yes, we're almost finished.
Or be like, what the heck are you doing?
This never happens. All right. See you guys. Yeah.
No, I wanted to compliment you on the microphone and the lights and everything.
Oh, thank you very
It's
much.
too fancy.
Very
It's too fancy.
professional. I need
Watching
some.
it Twitch
I
stream.
need some tips from you because you see, especially that I'm teaching a class next week at the whatever learning day,
Oh, cool.
and here I have like I really don't have any lights, and I'm all like yellow on the screen because it's all,
Yeah.
I have like wood panels here, so it's like all horrible lighting.
So Christoph, you may not like it, but like I'm a Canon fanboy similar to you, but if you want a video camera, you want a Sony. The Canons are just not good.
What do you mean, Sony?
Yeah.
I
So,
have Sony.
so I have a
Are you using
Sony.
a DSLR?
Yeah, I have a Sony 5100, which is not a very. It's like a $300, probably less at this point. You can
Wait,
use
as
it
your
from eBay.
webcam?
Oh, but is it like it's a like photo camera or video camera?
No, it's a DSLR, right? But like unless the Canons, Sony has a better model. Like Canon basically protects their high-end video cameras, right? So they don't give you certain features. And one feature that Sony gives you is clean HDMI. You can basically just literally plug in the camera to a capture card, and then you get effectively a webcam on your computer.
That's what I'm doing. I have a Sony. I have a Sony, whatever 7R Mark III.
Yeah, so then you have a high-end camera, so that works.
Yeah.
And
And
you know-
I had the same thing with my Fuji. The XT20 worked fine. I just needed to get an HDMI or HDMI to USB capture.
Yeah,
for
how
my,
do I?
So
How do I hook
someone
up the
actually
camera?
just announced you can plug in just USB on their camera and it works as a webcam now. Did you see that? One of the manufacturers put something out.
Yeah, that was
Yeah,
Canon.
Canon. Yeah, Canon.
But the
I
problem is
saw
it's
it.
connected with USB, and the problem for most Canon cameras is that they were really cheap on the USB connection. So the data rate that you get via the USB is not high enough. So you don't get
Okay.
1080p, you get 720p. In many cases, not even 720p. You get like sometimes even, what is it, 520p, whatever the next lower one is.
480.
And yeah, and then you don't even get like you don't even get full frame rate apparently. Sometimes they also drop frames. So like it's not great.
So what is the best capture device that I should get?
So the one that I bought is the Camlink from Elgato. The problem with the Camlinks is they are always bought out. So it's really hard to get them right now. You can get them from eBay. They usually cost $150 new, but you can get them on eBay for only $350 if you're willing to shell out that much money.
Damien has a script to pull to figure out when more.
We don't share this. We don't share this on the internet.
I got a
That's the whole point.
4K. Yeah, I got the Camlink 4K, and when I ordered mine, it wasn't on any sort of delay. I mean, it wasn't during quarantine.
Camlink 4K. It shows me $300 on eBay.
That's what I'm saying. Not new, it's $140.
Okay. And what about the light? What light do you have? Can I see it?
That will be a lot of work right now to actually get the lights. But these are cheap LED lights from Amazon, like they're like $20 or something.
Oh, really? What about the ambience lights in the back?
Sorry, that's the one. These are the ones I have. Like the ones I have here, like literally like super cheap IKEA lights. These are the ones.
Oh.
What about the mic?
Yeah.
The mic is not cheap. The mic is a Shure SM7B. It's a $400 mic with a mic stand and a XLR input.
The $400 mic?
Yeah.
That sounds awesome.
The problem with these mics is they need to be very close to you, correct?
Yeah, so that's the downside. So basically, Olia didn't want a mic that is close. So basically, you have two options. You can either go with a lavalier microphone, right? The lapel mics that you attach to your shirt or something. I have done this for a while. The problem with those is they are effectively universal pickup pattern, right? So they pick up everything. They pick up your keyboard. If your CPU fan goes up, they pick that up. And the other problem is you're wired in. So God forbid you forget and you get up to go to the restroom and then you yank out your whole computer equipment with you. I've done that too. So what Olia now has is she just has a shotgun microphone that we mounted on top of the webcam. And that one is a bit more directional. And this one is basically pointed at her, face basically, or ideally the mouth, right? And then this one picks up a lot less noise, but it still picks up more than these guys do, right? So this one is a dynamic microphone, so it basically has a very aggressive fallout. It almost picks up no ambient noise whatsoever. It only picks up me. But if I move slightly back, you can barely hear me now because it basically picks up nothing, right? So yes, the downside is they are more in the frame. So like if you don't like a microphone in the frame, that's a problem. But originally I was in that camp and now I don't mind it anymore. Like I just really like the voice and The fact that there's a
Too fine.
microphone
So
visible.
if you want a dynamic mic that's out of frame, like I've been using them.
Yeah, see, here's another one.
You have one too. You people that have these super fine setups.
Have you seen the tweet from what is his name? Jason.net. I'm blanking on his name right now. Like, he was basically saying he was working remotely for like 10
Oh,
years.
James.
Yeah, he said like, and now
Yeah.
Microsoft people are working remotely for like 2 weeks now, and they all order like DSLRs and green screens, and like, what's wrong with people? And
That's
yeah,
insane.
no, but it's good. Like, I'm actually quite in. The only downside now is that my computer's not fast enough. Like, we're dropping a fuck ton of frames because Teams and OBS at the same time are not good partners.
Yeah, and your internet seems to be, I don't know if it's internet or something else, but now your screen is blurry and
Yeah.
not anybody's else. Well, maybe Jeremy also has a crappy internet.
Yeah, no, it's not the internet. In my case, it's the CPU. Like, I'm 100% CPU and I'm 100% GPU, and so I'm
Wow.
just dropping frames at this point. Like this.
I got tired of having my XT20 mounted on a tripod behind my screen because I kept using it. So when all this started, I ordered any webcam I could get that shipped from the United States and was not back ordered. So I have a 480p manual focus webcam that sits on a pole 3 feet away from me.
Oh,
so,
okay. That explains.
so mine is camera. Not internet.
Yeah, Christoph, that's the other thing why I bought a dedicated camera. Like, even if the Canon would have worked, I don't like the unmounting part of it. So I just have a dedicated DSLR now that's permanently mounted. So it's connected once, you take care of the cables, and the quality is good enough. I think, honestly, like, even if you have a high-end Sony, I don't think you get much more out of it because the full frame doesn't buy you that much for this. The only thing is I have a nice lens as well with a 1.4, which, you know, blurs out the background quite nicely. And so the whole setup here is, I think, I don't know, $700 or something. So if you're willing to shell out $3.5K for your camera, I think $700K for your webcam seems reasonable.
I don't know. The problem is I already shelled out so much on my camera.
Yeah, that's true.
More.
All right. See you guys.
Olympus
Alright.
is running a sale.
All right. Bye.
I'm
All
glad
right.
we had this conversation. All right, Christoph, I will come later today, by the way. Are you around?
Yeah, because you have very nice lens and it's not yours.
But I like how much I paid for that lens.
All right.
I'll call you later. Bye bye.